Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. At the Hope Foundation Gala, Eleanor Vance's life is turned upside down by her husband Ethan's public affair with the ambitious Chloe Davies. What Ethan and Chloe don't realize is that Eleanor has been quietly plotting her return. When she arrives at the Metropolitan Club, she exudes an unshakable confidence and elegance that commands attention. With calculated precision, Eleanor sets out to expose the truth and reclaim her power, leaving those who betrayed her stunned by her cold, graceful revenge. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. They assumed Liz Dwart was crying at home. In reality, she was purchasing a $50,000 gown and hiring the top private investigator in New York City. The young woman in the striking red dress, clinging to Michael Ivedo's arm at the Metropolitan Club, was unaware of three crucial things. First, Liz had orchestrated every detail that led to her presence at that event. Second, the flash drive inside Liz's Hermes bag contained compromising photos of her with two other married men over the past 6 months. And third, the most significant of all, within 30 minutes, she would be leaving that gala in tears, while Liz would be immortalized as the legend that New York's high society would discuss for the next half-century. Michael thought he was trading in a boring wife for a glamorous plaything. Chloe believed she was winning the heart of a prince. Neither of them realized they had just awakened a queen. And queens don't forgive, they destroy with style. The September evening at the Metropolitan Club was dripping with extravagance and deception. The baccarat crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in a golden glow, illuminating the crème de la crème of American society as they gathered for the Hope Foundation's charity gala. The air conditioning kept things perfectly cool, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the insincerity that filled the room. Ethan Vance adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt for the third time in 5 minutes. At 38, the real estate mogul had built an empire that guaranteed his name in the social columns. But on this particular evening, he felt especially uneasy, not because of the event's importance, but because of the company he had brought. Chloe Davies moved through the ballroom with the grace of someone who felt she owned the place. At 29, her beauty was strikingly artificial, with perfectly platinum blonde hair cascading over her bare shoulders, framed by a scarlet-red Valentino dress Ethan had purchased just for tonight. The daring neckline and the fabric that clung to her curves didn't go unnoticed by the men around her, nor did it escape the gossiping whispers of the socialites. "Ethan, darling," the shrill voice of Mrs. Peterson, the wife of a federal judge, pierced the air like a blade. "What a surprise to see you here, and with a guest." Her eyes roamed over Chloe, a predatory look masked as polite social scrutiny. "Mrs. Peterson, always a pleasure," Ethan replied with a strained smile, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "This is Chloe Davies, my special assistant," he introduced. Chloe's laughter rang out like chimes. "Assistant? How modest, my dear." Her blood-red nails clung possessively to Ethan's arm. "We're much closer than that, aren't we?" Ethan's discomfort was palpable, but Chloe reveled in the situation. She had spent months carefully planning for this very moment, the night she would be presented to society as Mrs. Vance. In her mind, it was her coronation. The legitimate wife, Eleanor, had become a fading memory in their conversations, a woman who preferred quiet over the glamorous spotlight. For Chloe, that was a sign of weakness. "Where is Mrs. Vance?" Mrs. Peterson's question was delivered with the precision of someone who knew just where to strike. "It's been a while since I've seen her at these events." Ethan swallowed hard. "Eleanor has been busy with personal matters." "What a shame," Mrs. Peterson murmured, though her tone betrayed a different sentiment. She was always such an elegant woman. She knew how to carry herself with class. Chloe bristled at the comparison. Why was she always being compared to that demure woman? Ethan had told her Eleanor was dull, content to stay at home and read books rather than accompany him to high-profile events. To Chloe, this just proved that some women were meant to shine, while others were destined to fade into the background. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about the marina project," a partner from the company interrupted, sensing Ethan's discomfort. The relief on his face was immediate. As the men moved away to discuss business, Chloe stayed behind in the center of the ballroom, feeling like a queen on her throne. The flash of social photographers' cameras seemed to follow her every move, and she knew that her image would soon be splashed across gossip magazines, labeled as Ethan Vance's new lover. The champagne flowed freely, and Chloe, emboldened with each sip, felt more confident and in control of the evening. She made her way to a group of familiar socialites from the Upper East Side. "Chloe, what a stunning dress, Mrs. Allen," the wife of a magistrate complimented. "Valentino." "Michael's gift," Chloe replied, purposefully emphasizing their intimacy. He has exquisite taste in women's clothing. The women exchanged knowing glances. They all understood the subtext. Ethan Vance was openly flaunting his mistress. And while that behavior wasn't rare in their circles, it still made waves when done so brazenly. And how are you adjusting to the new role? Mrs. Allen asked, her words laced with double meaning. The others chuckled discreetly, while Chloe raised her chin with confidence. I've always felt more at home in this environment than others who prefer to isolate themselves at home, Chloe answered coolly. The subtle jab at Eleanor didn't go unnoticed. Everyone in the room understood that when a wife stopped showing up at events, it usually meant she had lost the battle to a younger, more ambitious rival. Across the ballroom, Ethan tried to focus on his business conversation, but his gaze kept drifting to Chloe. A part of him was proud to be with such a young, attractive woman, a confirmation of his success and virility. But another part of him questioned the wisdom of making his extramarital affair so public. She's beautiful, his partner commented, following Ethan's gaze. But don't you think it's risky to bring your friend to an event like this? Chloe isn't just a friend, Ethan replied defensively. We have a serious relationship. Serious. The partner raised an eyebrow. And your wife knows about this? Ethan looked away. Eleanor knows, he murmured, his voice filled with discomfort. She's just accepted that our marriage has changed. Chloe approached him, breaking his thoughts. Ethan, she said, her voice sugary sweet, Julian Thorne was just telling me about the new art collection he's acquired. Julian, heir to one of the nation's largest fortunes, was leaning in closer to Chloe, a smile playing on his lips. The flirtation was evident, and Ethan felt a jolt of irritation. It was humiliating to compete for his own mistress's attention in public. Chloe, Ethan interrupted, taking her by the arm. We need to talk to the event organizers. But Ethan, she pouted, Julian was just inviting me to see his private gallery. Another time, Ethan said tersely, guiding her away from the young heir. As they passed through the ballroom, Chloe whispered in his ear, You don't need to be jealous, darling. You know you're the only man in my life. But the words didn't reassure him. There was something about Chloe's attitude tonight, her overconfidence, her belief that her place in Ethan's life was secure. That disturbed him. Near the main table where the event organizers and influential politicians were, Ethan spotted Mr. Reynolds, an influential journalist with a reputation for being a master of social gossip. Mr. Vance. It's been a while, Reynolds said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And this beautiful young woman must be Miss Vance? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Ethan's face flushed, while Chloe, undeterred, smiled even wider. Not yet, she replied with a light laugh. But who knows? Soon. The implication was clear. Chloe wasn't just content with being the mistress. She had bigger plans, and she was letting one of the most dangerous gossips in the city know exactly that. Ethan forced a nervous laugh. Mr. Reynolds, this is Chloe Davies. Chloe, Mr. Reynolds is one of New York's most respected journalists. A pleasure, Reynolds said, kissing Chloe's hand with exaggerated gallantry. I'm sure we'll have much to discuss in the future. The veiled threat hung in the air. If Reynolds decided to turn this into a scandal, it could ruin Ethan's public image and his business. As they continued their conversation, the ballroom buzzed with activity. Politicians mingled with businessmen, socialites displayed their latest jewelry acquisitions, and the orchestra played a classical waltz to accompany this theater of appearances. Chloe was in her element. She waved to acquaintances, posed for photographers, and greeted important people as though she were already Mrs. Vance. Every move she made was a calculated step toward cementing her place in Ethan's life and in New York society. But deep in her ambitious mind, Chloe couldn't completely ignore the whispers she heard as she passed. Where is Eleanor Vance? What an embarrassing situation. Poor Eleanor was always such a distinguished lady. Why did everyone insist on talking about that woman? Chloe had never met her in person. Ethan always said that Eleanor preferred to avoid conflicts and confrontations. For her, this only confirmed her superiority. While Eleanor hid at home, she was shining in the halls of high society. What Chloe didn't know was that at that exact moment, just a few blocks away, Eleanor Vance was meticulously preparing for her own entrance into the Metropolitan Club. And when she arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. The scaffolding and the Queen's return. Eleanor Vance stood in front of the full-length mirror in her walk-in closet, observing her own image with the analytical coldness of a general planning a battle. At 30 Keat, she possessed a mature and sophisticated beauty that contrasted drastically with the youthful, obvious appeal of her rival. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing a face with classic features that needed no heavy makeup to make an impact. The dress she had chosen for the night was a masterpiece of French haute couture, a flawless black Chanel with pearl details that ran along the discreet but elegant neckline. The piece had cost more than many cars, but it wasn't the price that made it special. It was what it represented. Power, class, legitimacy, everything Chloe Davies was trying to buy with money borrowed from another woman's husband. Eleanor knew exactly what was happening at the Metropolitan Club at that moment. She had received no fewer than 15 calls from concerned friends throughout the week, each one of them eager to be the first to tell her about the public humiliation Ethan was inflicting on her. What none of them knew was that Eleanor had orchestrated every detail of that situation. "Ma'am, the car has arrived," announced Grace, her housekeeper of over a decade, appearing at the closet door. The middle-aged woman looked at Eleanor with admiration and worry in equal measure. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in months. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Grace." The truth was, Eleanor had discovered Ethan's betrayal long before any social gossip. Not because she was particularly shrewd, but because Ethan was embarrassingly careless. Receipts from expensive restaurants for 2 people when he was supposedly at work meetings. Charges for jewelry and dresses on his corporate card that were definitely not hers. Women's perfume on his clothes. During the first few months, Eleanor felt the familiar pain of betrayal. The wounded ego, the feeling of inadequacy, the questioning of where she had failed as a wife. But then, on a particularly melancholic Tuesday afternoon, something changed. She was flipping through a wedding photo album when she came across an image of herself on the day of the ceremony. In that photo, she radiated a light that had been lost over the years of marriage. It was at that moment that Eleanor understood a liberating truth. She had not lost Ethan to Chloe because she had failed as a wife. She had lost Ethan because he had failed as a man. From that epiphany, Eleanor began to plan. Not a vulgar and emotional revenge, but a cold and surgical strategy that would not only expose the couple's farce, but also guarantee her the freedom she had unconsciously desired for years. Over the next 6 months, Eleanor watched. She discreetly hired a private investigator, not to confirm the betrayal she already knew about, but to meticulously document it. Photographs, videos, hotel records, and even compromising recordings of conversations Ethan and Chloe had in public places, believing themselves safe in the bubble of arrogance they had created. More importantly, Eleanor used that time to reorganize her finances. Ethan had always assumed she was financially dependent on him. A sexist and ignorant assumption. In reality, Eleanor had inherited a considerable fortune from her paternal grandmother, investments in real estate and stocks that she managed personally without involving her husband. Furthermore, she owned her own art consulting business that earned much more than Ethan imagined. During the months of her absence from social events, Eleanor had also dedicated herself to herself in a way she hadn't in years. A personal trainer 3 times a week, regular aesthetic treatments, a complete wardrobe overhaul. Not to win Ethan back. That bridge had been burned irreversibly, but for herself. On that specific night, Eleanor had chosen the Hope Foundation Gala for precise strategic reasons. It was an event that brought together the core of the New York elite. People who had known her family for decades and respected her lineage and class. It was also an environment where the unwritten social rules worked in her favor. As much as they tolerated male excesses in private, the public exposure of a marital betrayal was still seen as an act of bad taste that should be punished. Most crucially, Eleanor knew that Ethan would bring Chloe to the ball. It had been she herself who, through a mutual friend, had planted the idea in the ambitious young mistress's head. The Hope Foundation Ball is the most important event of the year, she had commented strategically during a lunch. That's where society really shows itself. Eleanor's private driver, John, was waiting for her at the building's entrance. He was a discreet and loyal man who had worked for the Vance family for almost 20 years. He knew all the secrets, all the nuances of Eleanor's life, and his discretion was absolute. "Good evening, Miss Eleanor," he greeted her, opening the door of the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "You look stunning tonight." "Thank you, John. Let's go to the Metropolitan Club." During the 30-minute drive, Eleanor mentally reviewed every detail of her plan. She had timed her arrival for the exact moment when the ball was at its peak, when all the important guests were already present, when the social photographers were most active, when Ethan and Chloe were most relaxed and confident. Eleanor's phone vibrated with a message from Mrs. Peterson, the wife of a judge and one of her oldest friends. "Darling, they are shamelessly showing off. She is practically announcing herself as your replacement. Come soon to put an end to this farce." Eleanor smiled as she read the message. Mrs. Peterson had always been her fiercest ally, an old-school woman who firmly believed that certain traditions and social hierarchies should be respected. For Mrs. Peterson, Chloe was nothing more than a classless arrive trying to occupy a place that did not belong to her. Other messages followed, all from indignant friends reporting on Ethan and Chloe's attitudes. "She's wearing a red Valentino, completely inappropriate for a charity event," wrote Mrs. Allen. He introduced her as a special assistant, but she corrected him herself, saying they were much more intimate than that, added Mrs. Peterson. Each message confirmed that Eleanor's plan was working perfectly. Ethan and Chloe were digging their own graves with an almost comical excitement. Eleanor thought about her life with Ethan during the first years of marriage. She had genuinely tried to be a good wife, to support him in business, to accompany him to social events, to keep the house impeccable, to be the perfect companion on all occasions. But Ethan always seemed to see her as an expensive and well-behaved accessory, not as a real partner. As the years passed, she realized that Ethan had chosen her not for love, but for social convenience. She brought respectability, family connections, and an image of an ideal wife that complemented his business ambitions. In return, he offered her financial security and social status, a commercial transaction disguised as romance. Eleanor's awakening to this reality was gradual but irreversible. She began to notice how Ethan ignored her during conversations at social events, how he interrupted her when she expressed opinions, how he assumed that his own decisions were automatically correct without consulting her perspective. Small humiliations that accumulated over the years until they formed an unbearable weight. When she discovered the betrayal, Eleanor initially felt devastated. But as she watched Ethan's behavior with Chloe, the way he melted in front of her feigned naivety, the way he felt important by playing the mentor to the ambitious young woman, she realized that she had not lost a true love. She had gotten rid of a burden. "We're arriving, Miss Eleanor," announced John, interrupting her reflections. Eleanor looked out the window and saw the golden lights of the Metropolitan Club shining in the night. Dozens of luxury cars were parked at the entrance while paparazzi and social photographers awaited the arrival of important personalities. The red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main door, flanked by lush floral arrangements. "John, give me 5 more minutes," Eleanor asked. "I want my entrance to be memorable." She opened her Hermes bag and checked the contents one last time. In addition to the usual items, lipstick, compact powder, wallet, there was a discreet flash drive containing all the documents and evidence she had collected on Ethan and Chloe. She didn't plan to use it that night, but it was always good to have an ace up her sleeve. Eleanor also carried something much more powerful than any physical evidence: the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. For 15 years, she had been the perfect discreet wife who solved problems without making waves. That night, she would be exactly the opposite. Her phone vibrated one more time. It was a message from Mr. Reynolds, the social journalist. "Elena, darling, I heard you're coming to the ball. That's good. I missed your elegance at these events. See you inside." Perfect. Mr. Reynolds was clearly setting the stage for an epic confrontation between wife and mistress. Like all good gossip journalists, he could smell the drama in the air and wanted to make sure he had a front-row seat when everything exploded. "Now, John, it's showtime." The driver smiled through the rear-view mirror. He had seen Eleanor grow from a timid young woman to a powerful one, and knew that night would be historic. When the Mercedes stopped in front of the Metropolitan Club, a murmur spread among the photographers. Eleanor Vance had become a mysterious figure in recent months. Her absence from social events had generated speculation and conspiracy theories. No reappearance promised answers. John got out of the car and walked calmly to the back door. The silence was almost palpable. Even the most experienced paparazzi knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the door opened and Eleanor placed her foot on the red carpet, there was a moment of suspended time. She was radiant in a way no one remembered seeing before. More confident, more imposing, more genuinely powerful. The flashes went off in a frantic sequence as Eleanor walked slowly toward the entrance. Every step was calculated, every movement was a statement. She greeted the photographers with graceful waves, but she didn't stop for interviews. There was more important work to be done. At the club entrance, the doorman received her with an almost feudal bow. "Mrs. Vance, what an honor to have you back with us." "The pleasure is mine, Robert. A beautiful night, isn't it?" As she walked through the club's corridors toward the main ballroom, Eleanor could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. Music, laughter, lively conversations, the sound of people who had no idea that their lives were about to be turned upside down. She stopped in front of the double doors to the ballroom, adjusted her pearl necklace one last time, and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were Ethan and Chloe. probably still reveling in the attention they were receiving, still believing they had conquered something important. They had no idea that the true queen had arrived to reclaim her throne. Who do you think has the real power in this story? Is it the ambitious young woman, the cheating husband, or the wife who has a secret? Let me know in the comments below. The grand confrontation in the gilded cage. The Metropolitan Club's ballroom was at its peak when Eleanor Vance made her entrance. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz. Couples danced elegantly in the center of the room, and the buzz of conversation created a symphony of polite civility. The crystal chandeliers projected golden light onto the gowns and impeccable tuxedos, creating an atmosphere of refined opulence. Ethan was near the bar, laughing loudly at a joke a partner had just told when the first whisper reached his ears. Eleanor has arrived. The smile froze on his face. He turned slowly, searching with his eyes for his wife's familiar figure, but couldn't locate her in the crowd. A part of his brain still hoped it was a rumor that someone had confused a brunette in a black dress with Eleanor Ethan. Mrs. Peterson's voice sounded behind him like the harbinger of a storm. "Your wife looks stunning tonight." He turned and saw Mrs. Peterson with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile that high society women wore when they were about to witness the public humiliation of someone they considered deserving. It was then that he saw her. Eleanor was entering the main ballroom with the serenity of a queen returning to her palace after a long exile. There was something different about her, an aura of power and self-confidence that Ethan couldn't remember ever seeing before. The black Chanel dress hugged her silhouette with mathematical elegance. The pearls around her neck captured the light in a hypnotic way, and her brown hair shone like polished silk. But the most impressive thing was her posture. Eleanor didn't walk. She glided. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. And wherever she passed, conversation ceased, gazes turned, and a respectful silence spread like ripples in a lake. Ethan felt his mouth go dry. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Eleanor command a room in that way. It was as if she had transformed from a supporting character into the protagonist of her own life. On the other side of the ballroom, Chloe was telling an anecdote to a group of businessmen's wives when she noticed her audience had become distracted. They were all staring fixedly at something or someone behind her. "What's going on?" she asked, turning to follow their gazes. And then she saw her too. Chloe had often imagined what her first meeting with Ethan's legitimate wife would be like. In her fantasies, Eleanor would be a bland, visibly aging woman, clearly inferior in every way that mattered. Their reality was a brutal shock. The woman walking toward her radiated a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. There was something almost aristocratic about her posture, an innate class that made Chloe suddenly feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Eleanor was greeting guests with the perfect grace of someone born into that world. A kiss on Mrs. Peterson's cheek, a warm handshake with the federal judge, a kind word for the magistrate's wife. Each interaction reaffirmed her position in the social hierarchy, not as the betrayed wife seeking sympathy, but as the grande dame returning to her rightful place. "Eleanor, darling," Mrs. Allen's voice cut through the air like a crystal bell. The magistrate's wife approached with open arms and clearly moved to see her friend after months of absence. "What immense joy to have you back. I missed you so much." The embrace between the two women was warm and genuine, contrasting sharply with the art of visual displays of affection that characterized most interactions in that environment. "Patricia, you're radiant as always," Eleanor replied, her melodic voice carrying a tone of genuine affection. "How is Mr. Allen? I heard the appointment to the Supreme Court was confirmed." Yes, we are very happy. But tell me about you. Where have you been hiding all these months? You were so missed." Eleanor smiled with a mysterious elegance. "I've been taking care of some personal matters. Sometimes a woman needs time to reorganize her priorities." The answer was diplomatically vague, but loaded with subtext that did not go noticed by the women present. They all knew about the situation with Ethan and Chloe, and now they were beginning to understand that Eleanor's absence from social events had not been due to humiliation or despair, but to strategy. While Eleanor was talking, Ethan remained paralyzed near the bar. A part of him wanted to approach, to greet her as if nothing had changed, to maintain the facade of a harmonious marriage they'd always presented in public. Another part, the cowardly and guilty part, wanted to simply disappear. The decision was made for him by Chloe, the young woman, driven by a toxic mixture of jealousy, insecurity, and youthful arrogance, decided she would not be outshone by an older woman, no matter how elegant she was. After all, she was the one who was with Ethan now. She was the one who wore the expensive gifts, who occupied his bed, who had future plans with him. "Let's go say hello to your wife," Chloe whispered, pulling him by the arm. "It's the polite thing to do." Ethan swallowed hard. "Chloe, maybe this isn't the best time." Nonsense, she retorted, already walking toward the group around Eleanor. We're all civilized adults here. Chloe didn't realize she was about to make the most catastrophic mistake of her young life. In her limited mind, this would be the moment of her official coronation, when she would present herself as Ethan's new woman in front of the previous wife, definitively establishing the new hierarchical order. Eleanor saw the couple's approach long before they got close. Her eyes met Ethan's for a brief moment, and he visibly shrank under her gaze. It was as if she could see through him to all the guilt, all the embarrassment, all the cowardice he carried. Eleanor. Ethan forced a smile as he got close to the group. His voice came out sharper than he intended. What? What a surprise to see you here. The silence that followed was deafening. All nearby conversation ceased. All eyes turned to the trio, and even the orchestra seemed to lower its volume. It was as if the entire ballroom was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Eleanor looked at Ethan for a long moment, her expression perfectly serene. When she finally spoke, her voice had the sharp coldness of tempered steel. Ethan, what an interesting coincidence. She made a calculated pause, allowing his embarrassment to intensify. I thought you were in Los Angeles this week. An important meeting with investors. Wasn't that what you said? The lie was exposed with surgical elegance. Ethan had invented that excuse to explain his absence from home in recent days, when he was actually at a luxury hotel with Chloe preparing for the ball. Now confronted with his own dishonesty in public, he stammered. The meeting was cancelled at the last minute. What a shame, Eleanor murmured, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. Well, at least you didn't miss an event as important as this. It was then that Chloe decided to intervene. The young woman, misinterpreting the moment and thinking Eleanor was being submissive by not directly confronting the situation, took a step forward with a smile that was meant to be sympathetic, but sounded condescending. You must be Eleanor, she said, extending her hand with perfectly manicured red nails. I'm Chloe Davies. I've heard so much about you. The group around them held their breath collectively. It was a moment of such palpable tension that even the most distant guests began to approach discreetly, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Eleanor looked at Chloe's outstretched hand for a moment that seemed to last forever. Then, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she greeted her delicately. Chloe, yes, I've also heard a lot about you. The phrase was spoken with such elegance that it took a few seconds for Chloe to realize the venom contained within it. Ethan told me you work together, Eleanor continued, her voice maintaining the perfectly polite tone of high society. Something about consulting on project development. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but Chloe interrupted him, clearly anxious to establish her true position. Oh, we're much more than co-workers. She laughed, a high-pitched sound that echoed uncomfortably in the silence of the ballroom. In fact, Ethan and I have a very special relationship. The words came out of her mouth with the confidence of someone who believed she was revealing a truth that would give her power over the situation. Instead, she had just fallen into the most elegant trap ever built at a New York social event. Eleanor tilted her head slightly as if she were processing a particularly interesting piece of information. Ah, I see, she said, her voice still maintaining that deadly politeness. How courageous of you to make this public in such a way. The word courageous was pronounced in such a way that it sounded exactly like its antonym. Chloe began to realize that something was wrong, but her youth and inexperience did not allow her to fully decode the nuances of the conversation. Ethan, on the other hand, was as pale as paper. He knew Eleanor well enough to recognize the signs of danger, the overly polite tone, the smile that didn't reflect in her eyes, the upright and controlled posture. She was furious, but she was expressing that fury through the refined codes of high society, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any emotional outburst. Eleanor, he tried to intervene. Maybe we should. Oh, Ethan. She interrupted him softly. There's no need for embarrassment among civilized people. She turned to Chloe with renewed interest. Tell me, dear, how long have you two been working together? Chloe, interpreting the question as an opportunity to establish her supremacy, replied with youthful pride. About 8 months. Ethan has been a wonderful mentor. Mentor, Eleanor repeated, as if savoring the word. What an interesting term to describe their relationship. The air in the ballroom was so thick with tension that even the waiters had stopped circulating with the champagne trays. Dozens of eyes were fixed on Thetrio, and Mr. Reynolds, the social journalist, was watching everything from a strategic distance, clearly taking mental notes for his column the next day. Mrs. Peterson approached the group with a smile that promised trouble. Eleanor, darling, she said, her voice filled with false innocence. What a stunning dress. Chanel, isn't it? I've always been jealous of your impeccable taste in fashion. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. You know how it is. Some pieces never go out of style, do they? The insinuation was clear. True elegance is timeless, unlike the passing fashion displayed by certain younger people. Chloe, finally beginning to realize that she was being subtly attacked, decided to counterattack. Your dress is also beautiful, she said to Eleanor, her tone trying to sound generous but failing miserably. Very classic. It must have been very expensive. The comment was a grotesque mistake. To suggest that Eleanor cared about the price of clothes, or worse, that she needed to justify her expenses, was a display of poor taste that made several women present's eyes widen in shock. Eleanor smiled. This time, a truly dangerous smile. Darling, she said, her voice soft as velvet, but sharp as a razor blade. When one has true class, the price becomes irrelevant. It's something you're either born with or never acquire. The phrase fell on Chloe like a silent bomb. For a moment, the young woman was speechless, slowly processing the fact that she had been publicly declassed in the most elegant way possible. Ethan tried to intervene again, his voice desperate. Well, I think we should all, Ethan, Eleanor interrupted. Him again, this time turning to him with her full attention. Since we're all here, gathered so casually, perhaps it's a good time to clarify a few things, Chang'angs. The entire ballroom seemed to have stopped. Even the orchestra had ceased playing, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. Clarifications are always welcome, Mrs. Peterson murmured, barely able to contain her excitement. Eleanor adjusted the pearls on her neck with deliberately slow movements like a matador, preparing for the final thrust. You see, she said, her voice now carrying a tone of genuine amusement, there are certain illusions that need to be dispelled before they cause more embarrassment than they already have. Chloe felt a shiver of panic run down her spine. There was something about Eleanor's demeanor, an absolute confidence, an almost predatory serenity that suggested she knew something important, something that would completely change the game. I don't understand, Chloe stammered. Oh, darling, Eleanor replied, her smile now genuinely radiant. You will understand. All of you will. And it was then that Eleanor Vance began to methodically, elegantly, and irreversibly destroy the lives of everyone who had underestimated her power. What an epic and elegant revenge. Eleanor is a true genius.